After the more modern sci-fi settings used in Final Fantasies 6 through 8, Final Fantasy 9 has returned to the series' roots. It takes place in the world of Gaia, a world full of knights, mages, magic, and other traditional high fantasy. The story initially follows Zidane, who is a member of a band of thieves who is charged with kidnapping the Princess Garnet of Alexandria Kingdom. In a twist, Garnet is actually looking for a discreet transport from Alexandria and consents to the kidnapping as it fits her own agenda. They are joined by Vivi, a young child black mage who is also accidentally kidnapped, and Knight Captain Steiner, who is Garnet's royal bodyguard and is loyal to his kingdom to a fault. The four are eventually joined by other party members and are swept up in adventure, conflict, and conspiracy, as tends to happen in Final Fantasy games. Also, in continuing with trends in other Final Fantasy games, the plot does sort of take a dive off the deep end at around Disc 3 or so. Without getting too spoilery, the traditional fantasy setting does get strangely thrown out the window at some point, but the game is still worth playing if you can appreciate good writing. What sets this game apart from other Final Fantasy titles, for me, aside from its setting, is its well-written characters. Those of you who have played other Final Fantasy games may be rolling your eyes at well-written characters, but I really think it applies to Final Fantasy IX in a way that no other Final Fantasy game before or since has achieved. The characters in 9 aren't the flat, one-dimensional stereotypes of characters that are found in most JRPGs. There's also none, or very little, of the angsty JRPG melodrama found in the rest of the series. The characters in Final Fantasy IX are more subtle and nuanced, which speaks volumes not only for the writers, but for the translation and localization process this game had to undergo. This game even has humor, like legitimate, actual, intentional humor, and it works. Usually when humorous dialogue is written for a Final Fantasy game, it's facepalm material. It's funny, but for all the wrong reasons. Final Fantasy IX gets it right in a way that really endears all of its characters to the player. The battle system is, well, it's just fine. There's nothing really wrong with it, but there's also nothing really right with it either. There's nothing too broken like Final Fantasy VIII, but also nothing that really sticks out and grabs your attention to make you want to keep playing just one more battle like Final Fantasy VII. It's pretty straightforward and standard for a Final Fantasy game. It's pseudo-turn-based with the ATB system introduced in previous games, and your characters fit into predefined roles of black mage, white mage, summoner, knight, thief, etc. Just about the only thing noteworthy is that all abilities you learn throughout the game are learned from using a specific weapon a certain number of times in battle. For instance, if you want to learn the fire spell, you have to equip Vivi with the fire staff, or whatever it's called. This creates a sort of interesting dynamic where the weapons and armor you have equipped for your party may not always be the best, speaking strictly statistically. There's also the new limit break system called Trance, where your character becomes more powerful and gets access to new abilities, but this triggers pretty much randomly and always seems to happen when you're in a random battle that's easily winnable, and never up against a boss where you really need it. So yeah, the battle system is just fine, I guess. What's way better than just fine, and another notable reason to check this game out, is another superb, phenomenal, varied, and otherwise spectacular soundtrack composed by Nobuo Uematsu. I think Uematsu has gone on record saying this was his favorite soundtrack he composed. It's not necessarily my favorite as a whole, but picking a favorite Uematsu soundtrack is like trying to pick a favorite burger off the menu at Red Robin. I love them all. Standouts are the battle theme, Stirring in the Forest, Crossing Those Hills, Border Village Dolly, and Hunter's Chance. But the whole soundtrack is really a standout, as tends to be the case with Nobuo Uematsu. It may not have the best battle system, and the plot gets a little weird about halfway through, but Final Fantasy IX is still worth checking out if you like a well-written story with well-defined characters. The writing and soundtrack are enough to carry you through when the battle system is being dull and the story is getting weird. The game is pretty charming once you get invested, and it's become one of my favorites in the Final Fantasy series, and just in general.